Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure as the Vice President of the Black Business Council to continue with the program. My name is Yvonne Maitin, and I look forward to being the Program Director for the rest of the afternoon. We're now going to continue with a special address by Dr. Iqbal Survé, who is the Chairman of Sekunjalo Investments. I trust the technical team will connect with him, as this is a virtual session. Technical team, hello. Oh, there you are. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Iqbal Survé. As I mentioned, he's chairman of the Sekunjalo Investment Group and a man with profound presence in the business and political landscape. Doctor, over to you.
Good morning, Program Director, Mr. Elias Monachi, President of the Black Business Council, Mr. Khanki Matabani, CEO of the BBC, ministers and government officials, fellow industrialists, entrepreneurs, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for this opportunity to participate in this very important summit. I remember like it was yesterday when the Black Business Council was founded, and I was privileged and remain privileged, along with Sekunjalo, to be one of the original founding members of the Black Business Council. So it's a real privilege for me to deliver this special address today. I need to express my sincere apologies to everyone present that I'm not able to be there in person. I would very much have liked to be there, but I'm traveling to the World Economic Forum meeting in Davos, which is taking place this year in May as a result of COVID. So my sincere apologies for that. I've been asked to address on my special presentation on the role of the banks in relation to the creation of jobs, growing the economy, and supporting Black SMMEs, women-owned businesses, youth, and the vulnerable in our society, which is, of course, the theme of the summit. Many of you have heard during the course of the last day or so that South Africa faces a jobless future. And this, I would like to argue, is precisely because of the conduct of capital, and specifically the conduct of the financial sector, which in our country is dominated by the banking oligopolies. As a result of that, there can be no effective social stability, and that was shown recently, tragically, regrettably, during the July uprising. There can be no effective economic transformation, as many of you have paid testimony to that fact during the last day or so. There's no effective transformation and no effective opportunity for youth, as statistics show that youth unemployment has reached the unimaginable and absolutely devastating levels of 75%. And of course, no effective opportunity for women, disabled, and the economically vulnerable. And all of that suggests that the vast majority of people in our country have become bystanders to economic growth in the economy. So how does all of this apply in specifically to the Sekunjalo Group? Most of you are no doubt aware that Sekunjalo is in a gigantic battle with the banking oligopoly. I say oligopoly because 5 to 6 banks control 92% of the South African banking sector, and they also control the payment system called BankServe. We thus have personal and intimate knowledge of how the banking cartel works and operates. It is our lived experience. As a result of the battle with the banks, I've been contacted by numerous hundreds of people, in particular Black people, against whom the banks have discriminated. Banks have closed down the accounts of individuals, professionals, and entities because, as they say, they can do so. Most people have been afraid to take on the banks because, firstly, they are all powerful, and secondly, because it costs a fortune to be able to fight with these banks legally. Our situation is testimony to that, whereby to date we have spent tens of millions in actually showing how the banks have discriminated, not just against us. We are also delighted that there's now a class action suit coming by at least 6,000 people against the banks for discrimination, in particular against Black people, individuals, professionals, and business entities. I think that is going to widen the scope of our challenge against these banks. So this today is all of our lived experiences as Black entrepreneurs. Coming back to Sekunjalo, the banks are currently colluding to close down the entire Black-owned Sekunjalo group by closing its bank accounts, an organization that has been in existence for more than 2 decades, that employs more than 8,500 people, has revenues of just under 10 billion, and has 40,000 dependents. The banks, if the banks can do this to us, be aware, they can do that to any Black individual in this country. The banks have complete and absolute control of the financial system. If they don't like you, if they don't like how you think, how you dress, and for that matter, you know, your conversation, your language, your culture, your background, they will simply close your accounts, because that is the way they shut you out of the financial system. This is our real experience. So what have the banks said is the reason? Well, they say to us, you're not guilty of corruption, you're not guilty of money laundering, you're not guilty of illicit transfers. However, we are shutting down your account because of adverse media allegations. The irony is that these adverse media allegations are the very same stories that are run by the competitors of one of Sekunjalo's investments, independent media. These competitors run and terrorize our group, which is very much like mafia or thuggery, in trying to convey the impression of wrongdoing. It is propaganda and a playbook at its extreme. And they've done so in order to undermine our group. And the banks have used this. Now, the banks are not innocent bystanders in all of this. They are, in fact, shareholders and funders of these media organizations. But more importantly, they are sponsors. And in some of our competing businesses, the banks are the funders to those businesses. What is our crime? Our crime is that we have dared to compete with established white businesses in key industries. Our first sector was media. This was predominantly a white-controlled industry, and we dared to enter this industry in order to transform the media landscape. This was our sin. Since we acquired independent media, we have been attacked incessantly by the establishment, who have basically told us, and all Black people for that matter, media is our terrain. And if you don't toe the line in terms of the narrative, then, you know, we will attack you. We have competed with them in the ICT sector quite successfully, in the e-commerce sector, in the food and fishing sectors. In all of these sectors, which was almost the exclusive domain from wall to wall of white businesses, we have entered that terrain as an organization that is 90% of its top management structure is Black and predominantly African. Now, this is our crime and nothing else at all, because the banks themselves admit that we have done nothing wrong. And despite having examined hundreds of thousands of transactions going back as far as 2 decades into all of our businesses, they could not find a single transaction of illegality. So what they've now sort of reduced the argument to is in fact that of adverse media. But there's something a lot more dangerous and sinister about all of this, because the banks go a step further. They simply say the following: irrespective of the adverse media, which we don't care whether it's true or false, we have no opinion on that matter. you know what, we have the right to shut your account and any single person's account. And the banks use a seminal case which occurred in 2010, which is called the Bread and Come case, where the Supreme Court of Appeal, in fact, gave the banks the right in terms of contract law to shut down the accounts of anybody that the banks want to shut down or to refuse to bank anybody. This, of course, is a gross violation of our Constitution. And this is why we have taken the brave step on behalf of all South Africans, in particular Black South Africans, to take the banks to, firstly, the Competitions Commission for collusion, because we have shown that they colluded. But it's, of course, difficult to prove because they hide that collusion behind closed doors. But secondly, we have taken them to the Equality Court on the grounds of violating our rights in terms of our Constitution, and therefore your rights. Our case is an important case for the Black Business Council and for all of Black business to follow. And we do hope that our courts will exercise the constitutional rights that we should have. Of course, we know that the banks have not closed the accounts of white businesses that are corrupt. You know, we are not corrupt. We've never been corrupt. We've operated our business with absolute integrity for more than 2 decades. But businesses which are well known, such as Steinhoff, such as EOH and Tongaat-Hullett, that have in fact admitted to corruption. So when the banks argue why they not just have these bank accounts, but keep them open and lend to them, they say, well, these companies have reformed. Of course, the word reform is simply a synonym. They are white and it's therefore okay. They are our buddies and therefore we'll continue to bank them. But when it comes to Black companies, they take a completely different approach.
Thank you.
Friends, these are our concerns. South Africa will career into a crisis which will result, and it's already resulted in the following: concentrated economy, disempowerment of people, unemployment, inequality, gap between the rich and poor, increasing poverty, ineffective service delivery. A concentrated economy results in less delivery. The question, therefore, is how can we overcome these concerns in the banking sector? All of South Africa's banks originated from apartheid. I will not bore you with the details, but I do want to tell you that the banks are an oligopoly, because in South Africa, we only have 6 or 7 banks controlling most of the economy. The rest of the world, there are thousands of banks, as in the case of Germany, where there are 1,900 banks. The banks are an oligopoly and a cartel. What do we mean? The power is interrelated. They make decisions together. The directors and senior executives serve on each other's committees. They all come from an environment of capital. Of course, they appoint Black directors to their boards in order to give a semblance of transformation. But at the end of the day, it is their actions which determine who they are, not so much, the board members only, although there are some very good board members on these banks. We saw the example of SAA, where in fact, the banks are the ones that forced SAA to be sold for R1, according to Minister Pravin Gordhan. But it is the very banks whose loans to SAA was underwritten by government. During the COVID pandemic, the banks refused to bank Black businesses and Black entrepreneurs and professionals. More than 80% of the funding, of little funding, underwritten by government of the 200 billion went to white businesses. So that cannot therefore effect transformation. If we want to understand how to change the economy and how to grow it, then we need to look at China as a good example, where in China, for example, the state supported the banks to support entrepreneurs. And that saw China grow from one of the poorest countries in the world 40 years ago to the world's second largest economy, and having eliminated more than 700 million people out of poverty. So we have the situation where the banks effectively retard the growth of our economy. And so without capital, we cannot create wealth, we cannot develop our education system, we cannot create opportunities. The essence of the banking oligopoly and control and concentrated economy is that they're driving South Africa to become a failed state. There are many reasons for a failed state, but the principal reason for a failed state is when you don't allow capital, in particular to the majority of the population, to be able to actually carry out the entrepreneurial activities, professional activities, and business activities. So, ladies and gentlemen, how do we fix this? Firstly, we have to break up these oligopolies quite urgently. Secondly, we have to ensure that banks control over our government ends. It is absurd that the banks dictate financial policy, economic policy. We need to establish South Africa's truly black-owned bank and a reserve bank that is certainly state-owned. South Africa is one of only 8 countries in the world where the Reserve Bank is privately owned out of 200 central banks or reserve banks globally. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to challenge the Black Business Council to use a crisis which has just emerged as the single biggest opportunity for all of us. As you're aware, just in the midst of your summit, and our summits, the Black Business Council summit starting, just before that, the governor of the Reserve Bank did something extraordinary. The governor of the Reserve Bank decided that he would put the only black bank owned by union mine workers, black workers, Eubank, into curatorship. And it was interesting because I watched what the governor said when he made the statement. He said that Eubank was put into curatorship because it did not have sufficient capital adequacy. In other words, he said the normal banking adequacy needed to be about, I think, 20%, but it was 3%. And he also said there was some poor governance. Now, this is regrettable by the governor for one simple reason. When COVID started, the larger banks, Standard Bank, Absa Bank, Nedbank, Investec Bank, and First National Bank all faced a massive liquidity and capital crisis. And yet the Reserve Bank intervened to provide them with a floor of 250 billion in additional liquidity, and in some cases as high as 500 billion to shore up these banks. So if the Reserve Bank could provide, which is our money, by the way, as South Africans, it's not money that belongs to anyone else. If they could shore up these banks with capital adequacy, the question is, why did they not shore up Eubank? Okay, let's take the second reason, which the governor says, and he did not expand on the issue of corporate governance at Eubank. But he says there's poor corporate governance. But let's look at what's happened recently. Nedbank, Standard Bank have been implicated with massive corruption. And in fact, one of the commissions has recently suggested that the asset forfeiture unit recovers from them the monies that they made in connection with the transaction involving Transnet, etc. Similarly, Investec Bank has been implicated in tax crimes of billions of euros globally, etc., etc. Now, surely these banks will enable the corruption of Steinhoff, EOH, Tongaat, etc. Surely they have serious governance concerns. And surely if that's the case, then the Reserve Bank governor should apply the same principles that he did apply to Eubank. However, in a way, that's water under the bridge. What I would like to suggest is that the Black Business Council, as a concrete positive outcome of this particular summit, uses the Eubank crisis in the following way. Let us get together as Black business, Black entrepreneurs, Black professionals, and put together the capital required for Eubank to come out of curatorship. According to the Reserve Bank governor, Eubank has got great liquidity and assets of 5 billion. Now, if we come together and provide the 250 million to cover the capital adequacy as Black businesses, and then we put in a further 250 million, the Reserve Bank is obliged, as it does with all other banks, to provide at least 4:1, which means at least to 500 million, another 2 billion, or sometimes 8:1, as they do with all the other banks. because the money from those banks comes from depositors and from the Reserve Bank. So I would like to leave you, my dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, at the summit with this particular opportunity and challenge. And I want to commit from Sekunjalo's side the following. We are prepared to work with you as entrepreneurs, as business enterprises, and as professionals to recapitalize Eubank. I'm saying to you up front that we are prepared to commit immediately, obviously, with the required conditions, the 250 million towards the capitalization of Eubank. We don't want control of Eubank. We want to work together with our black partners and entities, to make sure that another black bank succeeds. Together, we can make Eubank the most successful bank. We are prepared to take to Eubank our revenues of about just under 10 billion of all of our companies. We are prepared to take our assets across to Eubank. We are prepared to work with you. So we are prepared to commit, President Elias Manachi, 250 million to work with you in the recapitalization of Eubank. Immediately after the summit, I suggest and propose that the Black Business Council executive goes and sees the governor and says to him there's a commitment from Sekunjalo to provide 250 million to a consortium of black businesses, and we also invite the public, and we invite the mine workers through the National Union of Mine Workers and various trade unions to join us. Let us together take control of our own destiny. It is only us that can do that by controlling the first real black bank, well capitalized. With all our collective efforts, we take control of our destiny, and we make sure that what was intended in our constitution and what was achieved in 1994 is not wasted. I would like to thank you for this opportunity and do hope that you take me up on this particular offer and challenge to recapitalize Eubank and save the asset and investment of poor mine workers that have spent decades under the ground, putting all their life savings into Eubank. Program Director, thank you very much for your patience and for the time. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to address the summit today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Survé. That was certainly a very thought-provoking address. And thank you for highlighting, the battle of David and Goliath, if you will, where black people are treated unfairly by, the banking sector and monopolies. It's also not often that, you have someone willing to put their money where their mouth is. And so I can say that as the BBC, we will certainly take up the challenge and explore this further with Eubank and yourself. Thank you very much.